So are you concerned with your child's screen use right now? Are you kind of indifferent about screens and you're like, thank God they will watch Wildcats right now because I need 20 minutes to like breathe for a second? Yeah. Okay. Are you unsure of like how to use screens, and maybe you have older kids that are now asking for phones and something like that? So the rapid advancement of technology and the potential misuse of these connected devices is an environmental factor that does need special consideration. So it's a good thing to talk about amongst your friends, with your husband, significant other, and in-laws, grandparents, and all of that. It's also a good thing to pray about and to, learn about. So who am I? My name's Prietto. I'm a speech and language pathologist. I work at Infinity Kids. We have one clinic right over at Anaheim Hills off Weir Canyon, and it's a multidisciplinary clinic. So I work with occupational therapists and physical therapists too, and we see children from, the PTs and OTs see babies, and then we see children all the way up to about 12. I'm also a mom. Those are my 3 boys. Now they're 11, 9, and 6. This picture was taken on our last day of 2020 when school was finally over and we were done like dealing with the technology, and they all got sent home with iPads and all that stuff. And so this was a huge celebration we had. There was a slip and slide in the backyard, and they were all wet. I love MOPS. I'm a former MOPS member, I think of 8.5 years, and I was a leader at our Laguna Beach chapter. And it was such a special place. It was such a fun time in my life, and I still have friends from that time today. And then I'm also part of the Laguna Beach Early Learning Task Force, and we're a task force that helps to provide information for parents. We just did an event the other day, so if you want more information about that. I've also presented this with Beilin Gulin, and she's a marriage and family therapist and educator and knows more about digital Screentime stuff. So if you want more information about that, I can share her contact information. Can I get like a raise of hands? How many of you have kids from 0 to 2? Like this whole table. Okay, what about 2 to 4? 5 and 6? And then older than 6. Okay. So that's good to know that you're all. This will be applicable to all of you. So right now we kind of deal with 3 concurrent phenomena of the new childhood, things that are happening with our children's lives today that may not necessarily have been happening with us. The first one that did happen when we were young is brain growth. The brain grows 3 sizes from the time that they're birthed till 3 years old. So that's just in weight. And then also it's important that we're making all those neural connections and connections with other people or environment, and that there's an attunement. I'm gonna figure out which way to push the button eventually. That slide on the left, shows that we're born with a lifetime supply of neurons, and these neuron synapses form based on our early experiences. So the more you'll notice in the slides, you'll see newborn, there's not that many synapses, and compared to 2 years, and then adults. At 2 years, we have the most neuron synapses than we will any time in our life. And as we get older, those neuron synapses prune, and then in adulthood, you see that there's those stronger connections, because those are the ones you use often. So it's important to build a lot of neuron connections at 2 and 3, using all parts of the body and all parts of the brain, because those are the ones that continue to be developed when we're older. And then if you see the other slide with normal versus sensory deprived, your mind is fine-tuned to the world you inhabit. So if you want a really colorful brain scan. So if you're getting exposure to physical activity, to music, to arts and crafts, maybe not your favorite, you build all those different neuron connections. I couldn't find a great image, but if you look at an image of a brain scan of somebody who's reading, you'll see that it's really colorful and it's cross-connected, and there's different areas of the brain that are being stimulated. compared to somebody who's looking at an iPad, and even an iPad that's reading a book to you, all those areas aren't being developed. So it's highly developed that you have all these external activities. I'm going to say down. So here, how would you like to learn about the brain today? I won't go into a bunch of detail, but 0 to 5 is a huge time for your children's lives to develop their brain. We develop in to out and from back to front for our brains, and then from head to down. That's why kids can hold their heads up before that they can crawl or sit up, and then they can walk and run and not fall over. So the frontal lobe is really important for cognition and memory, concentration, making plans, problem solving. Now we use a lot of that for our smart devices, that we will have that to be our calendar and to remember people's names and things like that. So when they're little, we want to continue to develop this frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe's the one that takes the longest to develop, all the way up until like 25, mid-20s. Those skills need to be developed, and that's why teenagers may not make the best choices and still have judgment errors. The temporal lobe is your chief auditory receptive area. That's for sounds and speech. The parietal lobe is more for coordination, and then occipital lobe is for visual processing. The cerebellum and the brainstem are for alertness and also coordination. And so the areas of the brain that are stimulated with reading, like I said, are all of those. Frontal lobe to be able to pay attention, to know what's happening next. Then temporal lobe for listening, so it's really important to read still at nighttime with your kids. And then even the occipital lobe for visual processing and then creating the images. So besides brain growth, another area of development is the executive function development. So if you look at the picture, you'll see children being able to sit at story time and listen to a teacher. And so that executive function is our management system of the brain. It works with self-control and memory. And in order to be able to sit at circle time, we need to focus, prioritize, problem solve, organize our bodies, regulate our emotions, and manage our behaviors and anticipate consequences. All of those things are definitely developing between 0 to 5, and those are also the ones that continue to develop now. I mean, up until 25. I'm thinking about my kids this morning and like their ability to plan how long it takes to finish eating breakfast, to brush their teeth, to put on their shoes. I used to, when I would lead MOPS, I would talk about like, it was a good day. I didn't yell at them on putting their shoes on this morning. Like we got out the door. And I'm really happy to say like I haven't yelled at them for like 2 years. So it does get better because like they learn how to do that stuff and they don't need to be yelled at. And now I just go get in the car when I'm ready to take them and I wait. And if they're late for school, they're late for school. Like that's their issue. It was such a struggle for me for so many years. Okay. And now I have my 11-year-old really prompting my 6-year-old to like get, because he cares to be on time. Okay, and then the third piece is media exposure. So we know children are introduced to devices younger and younger. Pre-pandemic, that time 0 to 2-year-olds, it was about 3 hours a day. Preschoolers, it was like 4.5 hours a day. I don't know the new research of what it's been like after pandemic, but I'm assuming that it's gone up. I know it did in my house. And then content. So being aware that like but like shows, cartoons, even songs can have more of the rapid images projected. If you look at like SpongeBob compared to go watch Jungle Book, and you'll see how slow the screen is, how slow all the actions are. You'll see that like most of cartoons now have that rapid image to keep their attention. And that's a big change compared to when we were younger. So one of the things that's really important with understanding the brain growth and development, that executive function, and then the media exposure is that when we're seeking to navigate screen time, I want you to know how important joint attention is. It's something I talk about with a lot of my clients as a speech therapist, especially with people who have children on the spectrum, but even now, post-COVID, the clients coming in whose parents had to work while their child was at home because daycares were closed, and so they gave their kids devices. The children had iPads, that they were missing out on a lot of this joint attention. And I know it was just a consequence of the pandemic, so I don't want you guys to leave here feeling blamed at all or guilty. I'm just saying this is something that I've noticed has really been missing with the clients that I'm seeing coming in now who are typically developing, but they didn't have these experiences. So joint attention is the ability to look at that triad, that the parent and the child are both looking at the same thing, they're talking about the same thing. When they're babies, it's usually when you're changing their diapers and you're talking about what you're doing while you're doing it. And then as they're like 6 and 9 months, they're pointing to something, you're saying, oh yeah, look at the butterfly. Here's a lot of examples of that. The mom looking at the book with her children, she's pointing to it, they're all focusing on the same thing, and she's talking about it. They're stacking blocks together, and she has an opportunity to talk about it and just look at her child. Sometimes I come home and I'm tired of talking. So it's more just like sitting and listening for my children and what they're saying about the certain situation. All these are huge, not just language building opportunities, but also brain growth opportunities. And in order for children to learn, we need to have that same joint attention and combining that. I mean, I think too about when I'm like trying to have a conversation with my husband and he just got home and he's finishing up work. Like, we don't have that, it's not gonna go well. So I need to like wait until he's done so that we can, hey, can we talk? And figure out our plans. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You can have multiple, they'll still have to shift gaze with somebody else anyways. So it's like if dad's trying to say like, look at the butterfly, and you're like, yeah, see, it's orange and purple. She'll still shift and she'll be gaining joint attention with you there. It's more that you guys can all have that concept of the same thing. No, if they're able to shift, that's fine. And especially they'll shift to whoever's like animated and talking more a lot of the times too. And it could be about them too. So like if I go back, while she's getting them dressed, the joint attention isn't on some outside object, it's also on some inside object. It's her clothes and how maybe it feels. A lot of times too, we talk about feelings this way and like, oh, that must be really sad for you. So you're both focusing your common idea and common thinking on an experience. Okay. I didn't time myself. I was gonna time myself to make sure I give you guys time to talk. So some of the things with navigating screen time, there's a lot of different age-appropriate opportunities. So we know that they're around, kids are using them more often, and a lot of times, especially, depending where your family lives and all of that sort of thing, maybe your husband travels or your family doesn't live here, you can still use the screen with your kids. So 0 to 18, some of the best opportunities are video conferencing with familiar people, doing telehealth. I did a lot of speech telehealth, especially at the beginning. Now more things are opening up. Listening to songs together and looking at photos together. Between the ages of 2 and 6, you can co-view educational material. There's a really great website, commonsensemedia.org, and I put that on your flyers too, so you can look that up. And it gives a lot of parent ratings and different information about content. Write emails together, make and send text, photos, and videos. So you notice all of these are with your child. I recognize, I don't watch Wildcats with my 6-year-old anymore. But I did initially. I wanted to see what it was that he was watching, because then when he is watching it, because for me, cooking dinner when they were little, 2, 5, 7, cooking dinner was the crazy hour. And so if I could let them watch screens during that time, that's what I chose. I had some other friends in MOPS who always came and they had an outfit and they had their hair done, and I was like, how do you do it? And she's like, well, we get up really early and everyone gets dressed and then they get to watch a screen. I'm like, oh, that wouldn't work in my house. Like, if I start the day with a screen, like, it's all downhill from there. I just know my family. But for me, dinner time was really critical. So I watched a Wildcrats video or something else that I felt comfortable with my kids. I looked at content and watched that, and then I felt comfortable with them watching it without me. Do you guys have any questions about this? Anything that you're using that you're like, I'm not sure, would this be a good idea? Because this isn't an exhaustive list either. Yeah.
My 2-year-old daughter is obsessed with Cocomelon.
Oh, yeah.
But it feels like it's very fast. And I'm like, it has the songs and it has the like cute education. Watching it, like how much is like too much? Like, because she's learning like I don't know what to do with Cocomelon.
Yeah. I use Cocomelon with a lot of my clients, and we view it together. And like, I can only handle 2 songs, so then we turn it off. If you're feeling like that, then you're probably right. Like, okay, this is really fast-paced. This is pretty long. My husband is a smart guy and really sensitive to a lot of this stuff, and he's one who noticed like some of these shows are really fast, like Cars. And so that's when we started going back through our Disney archives and watching some of the older stuff. There's some other resources I have for songs and things too. Pink Fong, I know, is another one that's pretty popular, and that seems to be okay. Baby Shark. Oh, yeah. 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 Yeah, so I typically say like 30 minutes to an hour before any bedtime or nap time. It's best not to have a device because of the blue light. Yeah. The rapid image changing and stuff, yeah, it does cause more addiction to it. It stimulates that part of the brain for alertness and things like that. And so, yeah. 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 Yeah, I think the like Blippi shows are like 4 minutes each, right? Like about that. Each song. Oh, really? Yeah. Right. Yeah. I like Blippi. I use that with clients too. Like, I think you can use, I don't know if it's here. I'll talk about it too. Tools, like using an iPad and a screen as a tool. Yes, use it as a break for you too when you need it. Like, I'm for that. I use it that way. But also using it as a tool. And I think Blippi, and I used to show YouTube to my 2-year-old, actually I think he was probably 18 months, of garbage trucks. Because he loved the garbage trucks and it only came once a week. So it's Thursday, but the garbage truck already came on Monday, and he wants to talk about garbage trucks. So we watched different ones. He learned the different kinds of garbage trucks. We built vocabulary around garbage trucks. I bought him little garbage trucks. So we just built his language and experience with these screens. Blippi, I think, does a really good job of doing that too. We don't see trains. We don't see farm animals all the time. So it's a good way to enrich their world. And I think the songs in it. I also really like things that have people. So I don't know if this is common knowledge, but a lot of times kids will, or when babies are little, they will recognize something in a photograph before they recognize it in a cartoon. So if you show them a picture of a bottle, they'll recognize that more than a cartoon or a JPEG of a bottle. So when you think about that with especially the 0 to 18 months, if they can see real trains and real trucks rather than just the animated ones, that's really good for their learning. Any other questions? Those are good questions. We've used YouTube Kids. I think the biggest thing with any of that is to set a timer. YouTube Kids. Yeah. Really what we use YouTube for a lot of times, because my son's 11 and 9 really like skimboarding, and it's not on YouTube Kids. So I found like what I wanted to show them wasn't there, so they can watch an iPad in the room with me. So. Oh, yeah. I turn it off. Yeah. I just do little bits of time that they can watch, and then it goes off. Yeah, and you'll see, because part of the things is it triggers watching a screen like that, and they get this. The screens target that center limbic system, and that's your emotional spot, and so it's giving them dopamine hits, and so they feel good, like as if they get a present too. And so when you turn it off, it's like you took the present away. So that's why, like, limiting content as much as you can, and then monitoring what the content is. Yeah. Yeah, there is. Using like that device, like for games and things like that, for YouTube videos where something happens like that, where it's a reward incentive, that stimulates a different part of the brain than just a TV cartoon. Especially a slower paced TV cartoon, that relaxes the brain. It turns off different parts. They still don't get the language processing as they do as if they're reading or playing. It's not necessarily that you're watching a screen on the tablet, like something on the tablet. Like, it's more that it's a 30-minute show that has a story that they're following versus a 4-minute YouTube clip. That gives that fast-paced, like addictive problem than watching a full show where they see a story or resolution. So that's it. And then it's also the interactive. The rewards and the dings and all of that stuff, that stimulates them to that reward center and dopamine, and that's that big alertion, and so that's the problem more than letting them watch a TV show. Yeah. So using the shows as a distraction is not good. Sorry. I've been at that space too with a 2-year-old and a newborn baby, so it was like, yeah, let's sit down and watch a show while I breastfeed or whatever. I also would take my son to the aquarium because they would like watch the diver. He would watch the divers, and I would sit there and breastfeed, and it was so peaceful. So highly recommend that. I was talking to Amanda, who's one of the co-owners of Infinity Kids, and she runs a feeding group. The occupational therapists work with feeders more than the speech therapists. And she said the 4 2-year-olds that were all in the feeding group, everything that they had in common was that they used TV as a distractor. And she said, they were raised during this pandemic period, so the screen was on a lot more of the time. But super important to be able to have that sensory experience of sitting and eating and noticing what they're eating and that sort of thing. Yeah. Right. It's totally different. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Uh-oh, did I pause it too long? There we go. Okay, I'm throwing these up here. Here's the American Pediatric Screen Guidelines. I don't know how you guys feel about doctors' recommendations these days. Sometimes I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. Other times I'm like, oh, whatever. There was another study that came out for as far as like developmental stages for speech therapists and OTs and things like that. That was recently done, and they kind of like dumbed everything down. And I'm not sure I agree with that research. But along with some of those opportunities I said, 0 to 13 months, limit screen use to video chatting along with adults. Same with telehealth, if that's how you can see your doctor, talking to friends. Limit educational programs to watching educational programs 18 to 24 months. So I think there may be I have some apps and some other media things in the handout that I gave you guys too, as far as finding educational stuff. 2 to 5 years, it says limit non-educational screen time to 1 hour weekday and 3 hours on the weekends. I have found in my house, now they're all 6 and older, that it's easier for me to say we don't watch screens Monday through Thursday than it is to say have to make that decision every day. That when they come home after school, and I have 3 boys, that recess and lunch wasn't enough time to be physical, it wasn't enough time to play. So we have like 3 hours till it's time to make dinner. So I tend to we don't turn the screen on or TV on. I'll take them to the beach, I sign them up for sports, I take them to the skate park. It's busy and it's a lot on me, but that's like something I'm really passionate about. I know that's not everyone's situation. I work part-time so that I can go and pick them up and do all those things. And then I hire somebody on the summer to help when I'm working to take them outside. So for me, that 1 hour every day wouldn't work. When they were younger, that's kind of what I stuck to because I was home with them, I was not working, and I needed to have some time. And I split it up so that I had some time in the morning and some time in the evening where I could call a friend because as soon as you pick up your phone, they want your attention. And sometimes I want to hear other people's voices and not just text. So those are some guidelines. You can find them online too. Okay, and then content is a huge thing to pay attention to. That's the one thing that like YouTube really frustrates me because they're always like 2 clicks away from watching something they should totally not be seeing. So language, violence, sexual innuendos, fast-paced and high-action scenes are all definitely something we want to be aware of. There's all different studies about violence and aggression and things like that. The words may. It may increase physical aggression, desensitization to violence, and be considered as a way to solve problems. So like 2 to 4-year-olds, there's cartoon violence, and that's okay as long as it's not shown to solve problems. 5 to 7-year-olds, it's okay to show that rough and tumble, slapstick, and fantasy violence, which I don't really understand what that means. But anything resulting in serious death or injury is too scary. And I know even like Lion King for my 5-year-old was too scary at that time because it was very violent and loud, and then somebody died. And then 8 to 10-year-olds can handle some action hero sword fighting and gunplay. So that's just like general guidelines, and that was from Common Sense Media, which is a great resource if you have questions about that. I told my boss, I was like, I don't know about saying this regarding certain content. Like, I don't want anyone to feel bad if their kids are watching SpongeBob SquarePants because that's a fast-paced one. And she's like, oh, my kids watch SpongeBob. And she's like, I'm not offended. But she's like, that's just his thing. He watches. I was like, that's okay. Just know that it has a lot of sexual innuendos and it's fast-paced and it might not be great. She's like, huh, okay. He does have attention difficulties too. So I felt less guilty with letting them watch screens when I knew this, that 0% of educational use of kids who watched educational programs had 0% issue with attention in school later. So if it was educational, it didn't affect their attention later. It was when it was this entertainment where they're just kind of zoned out and watching it and it's the quick paces and songs and lights and all that, that they had more of a risk. And then with the violence, it was a lot higher. So I think that was a helpful graphic for me to know and see. Yeah. It was typically developing kids, and they didn't specify gender. Mm-hmm. And so then the time effects. So we talked about content and then time. So time effects. The kids who watched more television just in general, and the little ABC block shows it was educational versus just regular screen. No, the ABC blocks show play, and then the TV, the old school TV, is their television. So those who watched more television were more likely to have attention problems, and those who had more play were less likely to have attention problems. You kind of know that, right? That makes sense. So content and time matter. So that's why I do look at the guidelines and limit our time. So a lot of times, because when they do use screens and it's fun and exciting or even educational, it's hard sometimes to, when they turn it off, it's like you removed their drug or took out their pacifier. So setting expectations at the beginning. Okay, we're gonna watch 20 minutes of so-and-so or 30 minutes of this. I set my kitchen timer too so that I remember. This is a great tool if you need to teach your kids to transition. I found it on Amazon, but it's a clock that the time runs out. It's much more concrete than just saying a time or even the digital timer going off. I use first then. So, okay, first you're gonna watch this, and then we're gonna turn it off and go to the park. Transitioning at natural. Okay, the natural finishes was a huge one that I noticed made a big difference with my kids, because even if I set the timer or I forgot or I gave them an extra 5 minutes, it was way more helpful if I let them finish a show than to just, and like if I come in and they're in the middle of a 2-minute song and it's easier to let them finish rather than be so hard on the time. It also made sense to me when someone said, when you're in the busy middle of doing something and you're engrossed in it and you're having a good time with it and the child wants a snack, you're like, ugh. It's so much easier to transition when you're like completed something and then go. Some apps have built-in timers. I wouldn't know much about that. I don't know how to do that. And then lining up activity for after. I know that's not always easy. So sometimes when you're like letting them watch a show, if you throw Play-Doh out so that you're like, hey, look, I have Play-Doh for us. But I know that's not always what we're doing. Yeah. Yeah. That's huge. Yes, that's really helpful too. Okay, so don't feel bad if your kids watch screens, because 90% of 3 to 4-year-olds watch screens. 74% of 0 to 2-year-olds watch screens. So our kids are all watching screens. It's part of their life now. So how are we gonna navigate it? One of the key things that Bailyn and we first wrote this, developed this talk when it was November of 2020, was want to give parents ideas that they could do both online and offline. So things that you could use the screens for when they had them, and things that you could do separate from screens to develop all those areas of the brain. So I love this quote: "Play is not frivolous, it's not a luxury, it is not something to fit in after completing all the important stuff. Play is the important stuff. Play is a drive, a need, a brain-building activity." So early childhood is a critical period for brain development. Add more time for real play and less for those fast-paced media. Do you guys know Cosmic Kids? What do you think? I love it. I would do it with my kids, and I'm not a yoga person. I'd way rather go for a hike or run than do yoga. But it's storytelling through yoga, and so it's a fun way to get their bodies up and moving. Because one thing that when they're watching a show or doing a device, it doesn't stimulate the physical, the cerebellum at all for coordination and movement. That's why now Mickey Mouse Clubhouse has them stand up sometimes or clap their hands so that it wakens that part of the brain again. But the Cosmic Kids is a great one. So we use this for rainy day activities. Go Noodle was played a lot in my house when my youngest was kindergarten on Zoom. So I don't like that one anymore. It was overused. That's also fast-paced and bright and all of that. And then we love making obstacle courses. Being in a multidisciplinary clinic, they often use obstacle courses. I bought hula hoops from the dollar store and fun noodles, using pillows and things in the house when it's raining, especially with having boys, they need to move. I know a lot of my girlfriends have active girls too. And so going under a chair, over the couch, it's a lot of fun. And the cleanup is not bad with that one. Crawling is really good for reading development because it helps you cross the sides of your brain. And so my youngest wasn't a crawler, he just booty scooted. So using obstacle courses to help him continue to crawling over pillows and things like that. Our occupational therapists will also have kids push heavy hampers or things like that. If your child has a hard time regulating their body or just getting calm, using heavy stuff is really helpful. Put a backpack filled with books and have them go through the obstacle course too. So when they're just having a crazy day, that's regulating for their nervous system. Do you guys do Daniel Tiger? Yeah. My youngest is 6, but I feel like I'm already out of what's fresh. I love Daniel Tiger for, did I skip emotional? Yeah, for social skills. We play, I won't sing it for you, but the Feeling Mad song, when you're feeling mad, that works really well with my youngest. He has quite an emotional vocabulary because of this. And then also social skills. And so that would be our online activity is the songs or watching the shows. That was one I felt totally fine with him watching without me there. And then pretend play. With having boys, I did not know how to do pretend play with these action figures, and it's all they do is smash and crash and things like that. So I would reenact any show that we had watched with the action figures too. And then a lot of times just letting them lead. So it wasn't always about me trying to teach them of how to have these social skills and pretend play, but letting them lead and figure out anything they needed to. But it's super important to do pretend play. I have a friend who hates pretend play. And so with her daughters, she would set a timer and just make herself do it for 20 minutes so that she can get it in because she knew it was good for them. But I think too, I talked about the quote of play isn't frivolous and it's not a luxury. I think it's so important that we get to play too and enjoy that play with our kids. So if it's not pretend play with doctors, then maybe there's something else that I can incorporate that I like. I like sewing, and so when my boys were into superheroes, I made them capes. And so that part of the pretend play was fun for me, that I could like, okay, what should it look like? You know, what color do we want? And I still remember like making those. There's this emotion song on Sesame Street that's really cute. It's a little bit for older kids. Daniel Tiger also has some great emotional songs. So I find, as a speech and language pathologist, I'm also teaching a lot of vocabulary skills and vocabulary and feelings vocabulary. It's not something that I grew up with, was having a big, extensive emotional intelligence and vocabulary for my feelings. And so it's definitely something that I wanted to teach to my kids. When you talked about maybe you're not interested in art or anything like that, then outsourcing some of this stuff is really helpful. So one of the things so that's what I would use. There's a Little Spot is another online one about emotional literacy, emotional maturity. And then I like this book, Listening to My Body. I've used it with a lot of clients. I've used it with a lot of fluency clients too. It talks about different parts of your body and sensations and things like that, as well as I made this toolbox. My husband was like, you're not going to tell them to play with Play-Doh. They're not going to want to do it. And I say, yes, I am. So this toolbox was a sensory kit that I used when my kids were doing online school 4 hours a day. And so when they needed these like sensory breaks, they could dive into this. And so there was not the kinetic sand, but something like that, Play-Doh that we had made. I added essential oils to it so it smelled good. I have essential oil rollers in there, a glitter tube, which is really fun for like babies to look at and roll around with. Just something to kind of look at when they're 2 and kind of calms down because it's water play. Water play is another great sensory one too. These tactile brushes that we had. My youngest is really, or my middle is pretty sensitive. So using things like this, a lot of tactile things, like the soft bunny things, just to take a little break. Massage oils is another thing to add to this. I thought it would be a really good Easter basket idea. So if you were like thinking of what should I put in their Easter basket, try and think of like some sensory things that it's okay if they pull out and play with. Squishies, because they don't make anything messy, but it has the same effect as Play-Doh at times. And part of the reason for that is to talk about how things feel, because if you give the vocabulary for the physical thing, then when they're feeling it internally, especially when I'm thinking of like 1.5 to 2.5-year-olds, that they can say, hey, my stomach feels tight, or I feel scratchy. They know that external feeling before they're going to be able to describe it internally, which is super helpful. When you're like, my son would say like, my head feels cold. And that was the way he would describe a headache, because he didn't know how to describe it any other way. So it was helpful to give more language. Okay, this is some of the apps I looked up on Speech Sisters. It's a great Instagram to follow if you're curious about language development. They do a lot of parent education. This one's called Peekazoo, and it has really good information, animal sounds, labeling, asking questions. And then I also added some more to your handouts, so you can look those up. I don't use a lot of apps. I find them boring. One of the things too is I have worked with a lot of children who come in, especially boys, that play video games, and that's what they want to talk about in speech therapy, and I find it so boring. So I didn't want my boys playing a bunch of video games because I didn't want to talk about video games. So instead, like, we've developed other interests. So that's totally your prerogative as a parent too. If you don't want to talk about, I don't know, Cocomelon, like, find other interests that they'll be excited about, that you want to talk about and engage with them. And then another thing that's pretty important for language and cognitive development is interacting with your kids, playing with them, find the things that you like. I like building Legos, so I'll do that with them. My kids usually get a box of Legos for Christmas, and we follow the steps and we do it together, and it's awesome. I put the owls on there because there's something called owling. So we observe what our child's doing, what they're looking at. It's part of that joint attention. We wait. And then we listen to what they have to say and what their response is. And that helps with their initial initiation of something, and then also to see like how they're interacting with this thing, and then we can give them language with it. A lot of times you can help your babies learn to develop talking by imitating their sounds and not just always like, you say what I say. Okay. And then to build communication skills and just general knowledge, Art for Kids Hub is awesome. I've done that with my kids. It's really helped us all develop these skills. And it's something that I will let them use the iPad for. And now they can sit and draw with the iPad while I'm cooking dinner. And then, we give the pictures away to grandparents and stuff like that too. I will throw them away. I don't save all of their art. And don't feel guilty about that. And then also just, do the Play-Doh and things to be messy. I did outsource painting. That is what they do at preschool. They don't really paint at my house. During the summer, we'll do water, and they can paint the fence with water. That's cool, but paint's not one I do more now because the youngest is 6, so he can handle it without being so messy. But I'd rather they did most of that. Glitter doesn't come in my house. I'll do a little bit at work, and bubbles stay outside. And then waiting games. We taught my kids to do Say-Say-O Playmate, and they love it. And they're boys, and they'll do Say-Say-O Playmate with us. And other clap hand songs, teaching them ABC games, think of something that starts with an A, with a B, because it's so tempting to give a device when we're standing in line somewhere. And if you have to go to the DMV, yes, bring the iPad with your kids. But otherwise, while we're waiting for a meal, if we're at a restaurant, 20 questions, Simon Says, the I'm thinking of games. We started this game at dinner. Sometimes they'll eat real fast, so where somebody will be like, I'm thinking of a number between 0 and 100, and then they get to ask, I think, 4 questions. Is it odd or even? And it's this game that they just made up that they love, and their math skills are pretty good. So, it's pretty cool the things that you can develop when you don't use the screens for those typical times that's so easy to. Okay, I hope you feel empowered. I know a lot of the times I walked away with MOPS, last week we talked about doing chores, and now this week I've got to, change their diet. And so I hope you feel like there's a takeaway that you can use and a tool you can use rather than just oh no, I can't do what I've been doing. I think it's super important to limit the time of exposure, to add quality time, to help achieve your optimal well-being for you guys and your kids, and to assure success and sustainability. So adding something that you like to do with them. I learned how to surf during COVID, and so I will go out in the water and do that with them, rather than just sit on the sand and look at my phone. And then swapping out things. So just, swap out if you're finding some of the apps or things are too fast-paced. Try to find ones that are more, they're a little slower. We haven't done Bambi yet, but I bet that one's super slow. Bambi. All right, that's it. If you guys want some tabletop topics, I can give you some prompts.